Hey, what's up guys? JB here. Welcome to another episode of my Future Look series. And today we're diving into the wind elements with the latest 100 cost permanent pool unit from the Japanese side in Glaciela here. And the rough translation on her name is Flag Bearer Glaciela, or some people have been calling her Revolution Glaciela. Now Glaciela is definitely up there among the most popular units in War of the Visions, especially on the Japanese side. And this is actually going to be the third iteration of Glaciela introduced into the game, and second 100 cost version. I have previewed her kit, and let me tell you, it is a doozy, so let's dive into it and see what she can do. So as we said, Glaciela is going to be a 100 cost wind-based unit. She has 3-1 movement, and she can wear cloth and hats. And let's start with Glacie's TMR, which appears to be the shawl or cloak that she's wearing here. And the effect is going to grant you and your allies the Protect status, and it has 2 casts. This is an interesting sort of sister TMR to More the Merriers, which does have a similar effect, only that it provides shell instead. I do like this TMR quite a bit. Although there are more sources of Protect and Shell Dispel in the game, they still remain one of the most powerful defensive statuses that you can have, and are definitely a path to make some of the tanks out there a bit more viable if they don't bring this kind of status innately in their kits. Now moving on to her innate stats, and there's definitely a lot to like here on this unit, and starting with her hit points, she's sitting just north of 4,000. In my view, anytime you're sitting in that 3,900 HP or higher zone, you're going to be in a good position to be part of that bruiser class, meaning that you generally can take a couple of hits before you go down. In addition to that, Glacie has a very strong attack value here, sitting at 577. Now 436 of that is actually her base value, and incredibly, this is actually setting a new bar for base attack in War of the Visions. The previous high for this category was at 426, and that was shared by several units actually, including Astrius and Cloud. So we know right off the bat, she's going to scale very, very well when it comes to any sort of attack-based boosts. Glacie is also above the UR average when it comes to both her dex and luck values. She's also sitting at an impressive 38% base chance to crit, and that's helped quite a bit by her mastery ability. That 38% chance to crit is very, very high. In fact, her innate crit opportunity is actually considerably higher than both Tidus or Cloud, 2 units known for critting quite reliably. On the defensive side, she has positive resistances here to the 3 main damage types in the game, with 15% to slash and 10% to both missile and magic. Now, in terms of cons here for Glaciela, just looking at the stats alone, it's kind of actually pretty difficult to come up with any. There's just really not a lot of downsides here. I'd say the most concerning one for me though is the lack of innate defense and spirit. The other one here for me would be her lack of innate pierce or strike resistance. Notably, those are 2 types of damage that the ice element is very strong at. I'd say though that's just a little bit nitpicky. All around, her stat block here is very, very impressive and probably one of the best that I've seen since Astrius. Alright, so let's look next at Glacie's support abilities and counters and see what kind of build path options that we have for her. And Glaciela actually has 3 very, very nice passive abilities here. And the first one here is going to be from her new unique main job, and it brings 20 area resist, 40 defense penetration, and 25 accuracy. So it's just another one of these amazing sort of passives we've been seeing on all of the latest 100 cost units, and is definitely a no-brainer, always-on kind of passive ability. To pair with this one, I think you could go with either options 2 or 3 here. I think for more of an all-around builds with some accuracy focus, I would lean towards passives 1 and 3 here, and I do consider accuracy very important for this unit. As we'll see when we get into the skills overview, no guaranteed hit for Glaciela. Another option would be maybe for a tank or defense busting builds, and with that you could go with options 1 and 2 here, and these passives along with some equipment or trust stones is going to make it very, very easy for Glaciela to hit that 100 defense penetration plateau and have her ignoring defense entirely. There are merits for both of these options. I think in most cases I'm fine with that 60 defense penetration level that she'd be able to achieve in that first build, but you can cater this towards how the future meta is developing and whether we're seeing evade or super high defense tanks out there, and just take whatever best fits the targets that you're seeing. Passive number 4 here is definitely more of a niche play, and that's because it's bringing that nullification to both confuse and stun. I did want to mention it though, just in case we see a future meta develop which centers around countering Glacie with both Agrius and Snow. they of course bring those statuses on their limit breaks. So being able to shut those ailments off completely via this passive, I think, is a nice defensive play in making sure that you don't get hard countered. For a counter attack, the choice is very easy. Glaciela gets reflex, so just set that one and forget it. Moving on to Glaciela's new main job, and let's take a look at her buffs here. Her first one is a self only, and this provides 3 turns of 25% slash and magic resist, as well as a 40% attack buff. Pretty considerable resist buff here, and that's 2 damage types that we see very often in PvP, so I do actually like this one quite a bit. Next up is her party buff, and this one is bringing a 3-hit, 50% all damage barrier. On top of that, it has an effect very similar to Cloud's Soldier's Honor buff, which restores 10 AP each time that you crit. As we talked about, this is a unit that you're going to be able to bank on critting in almost all situations. So that's going to be very nice for her AP sustain as well as her teammates. We're actually not done there yet though with this buff. It's also bringing 30 accuracy to the team as well. So this is a very nice party buff here. Of course, that barrier is very nice to begin with. For auto PvP though, where your enemy is going to be focused on your tank, it is definitely much more rare to see area of effect barrier breaks. So this is going to have her in a position to shake off area damage very nicely behind a tank. Let's look at her main job attacks now. And the first one has a very nice range. This is actually a range 5 with a range height of 3. Similar to other Lancer type sort of spear throwing skills that are present in the game, this one's range is actually amplified by height differential as well. So the range can get even higher than this if Glaciela is sitting on a tile that is more than 2 range height above her target. This one is also her low AP attack, so it's bringing that low 121% mod. It does have a dispel effect attached to it as well. Unfortunately, the dispel is coming post damage, so it won't be able to strip off any buffs before it hits. Next up, we have a big cross attack here, and just based on the pattern, it does look very similar to some of the pounce attacks that we've seen in the past, like Glaciela's Leap Strike. And this one is an area of effect dispel of a mortal spirit, and it does that prior to hitting. Otherwise though, this is up to a range 5 with a range height of 1, it has an additional range height on the area of effect, and it brings a medium 165% mod. On top of that, it does have an additional effect, and that's that the hit chance on this attack is increased by a flat 30. So no guaranteed hit here, but between this attack, her accuracy buff, and the nice starting accuracy that we talked about, she's going to be in a very nice position to deal with evade units. This is also a 3-hit attack, so she's going to be able to slot in very nicely to a Wind Guild Raid team on top of that. Next attack here is a range 3, range height 1. It's got a medium 165% mod, and prior to the damage coming in, this one applies a 30% Wind Imperil. So big damage skill here is it's going to hit like a truck. It doesn't quite match the 38% Imperil that we're used to seeing on some limit bursts, but this is something that she can actually use multiple times, which is very nice. And this one, like most pierce-based attacks, will pierce through the first target and hit any other targets behind them as well. We are limited by this line pattern and the range height of 1, but very nice skill here nonetheless. This one is a 2-hit attack too, so this is just another nice chaining option for her repertoire. Her last skill is a range 2, range height 1 again with a medium 165% mod. So just glancing at the skills here, no large modifiers here for Glaciela. I think she's going to be okay there though. Her ability to crit reliably is already going to make these skills hit much harder. This skill here though, you can see before the damage is coming in, it is dispelling the re-raise status. So Glaci here can now deal with either re-raise or Immortal Spirit, which is very, very strong, and she can technically hit 2 enemies with this because it does pierce through the targets if they're lined up. So the kit here is looking mighty fine for Glaciela so far. We saved the best for last here, and that is her Limit Burst. And this one is a range 3 with a range height of 1. It has a 3x3 block area of effect that you can see here. No imperils or breaks or similar, that we've seen on other 100 cost units in the game. Instead, we have a brand new mechanic for War of the Visions. And what this one is going to do is it's going to allow you to extend your chain even if the targets move and take their turn. Chaining is just something very fun and impactful to do in the game. So I'm happy to see our capabilities being expanded here, and I'm even more excited about the new strategies that can be born out of a capability like this. The nice thing about this Limit Burst is that it's great in both PvP and PvE. Imagine landing this on an enemy tank. Even if they take their turn, they're still going to be exposed to those additional chain modifiers. allowing you to ramp up your own or your teammates' damage and melt them down very, very quickly. On top of that, for guild raids or trials, this is just going to be an insane ability. No longer are you going to have to worry about the boss taking their turns and having to ramp up your chains and damage all over again. So I absolutely love this limit burst, and I hope we see more of this for other elements in the future. Alright, Glaciela's sub-jobs are up next. And starting with her main job sub, she's going to get 2 abilities, as is pretty standard. The first one nets her a move 1 and an AP consumption decrease of 30%. So that's going to get her up to a 4-1 movement. And I do think this one is very, very nice for manual play. Along with that, she gets another attack, and this one has an AoE slow effect. So again, maybe something to consider for a guild raid or trial where you're trying to slow the boss. I think though that I'd want Glaciela to get right in and start using her 3-hit chains or her limit burst. So I would probably tend to look elsewhere for a slow. Nice though if you have no other option for that. Her next sub-job is her Trick Lancer, and this is the same job that Winter Luartha has. And she has access to some nice utility with this job to sort of round out her kit, and that includes a barrier break as well as some AP draining capability as well. I do really like that Trick Lancer job, and maybe if she had the 50% chance to immobilize skill, it would be more of a consideration for me. I think though in most cases I'm going to go with the third sub-job here, which is Nightblade, and definitely for manual and CM play I think that is a great option. But even outside of that, I think the most important thing here is that she's getting access to a second damage type, and being that there really isn't really much access to any type of pierce res penetration in the game, I think that's really important to avoid getting completely shut down by a highly pierce resistant enemy. She will get access to a couple of nice skills here. Double resist, of course, gets that missile and pierce resistance. And the cool thing about that skill is it does give her a 25 resistance buff to all of the damage types in the game other than strike damage. She does get a couple of notable attacks along with that as well. She has Spinning Slash and Maiming Slash, both of which are area of effect and have pretty nice mods on them too. Alright, so you're interested in pulling for Glaciela, what are going to be the future considerations? And first and foremost is the Vision Card and Esper combination that will be introduced the week following Glaciela's release. And that's going to be Dark Tetra here. And this is set to be our second dual element effective Vision Card, and it's benefiting both the wind and fire elements. So in terms of your team composition, being able to mix in a fire unit is actually a pretty nice option to have. And that's going to allow you to cover your ice element weakness in a big way, especially when you're able to amp up both of those units' power with one vision card. As we saw with Dark Odin, the base stats on this card are insane, giving a little bit to almost every stat here. The main party effect is a 25 physical human killer. It does also bring some single target resistance and missile resistance on top of that, though it is at the reduced 10 value. Overall, nice card here. It does come with a solid wind Esper on top of that, and it's tailor-made for Glaciela. It has a mix of wind attack and pierce nodes on it. I do kind of wish that the Esper itself had more overall relevance for fire units with some of the nodes, and especially with the summon effect that it has to maybe tie in better with the dual element theme of this card. So I think that's probably my main critique of it. I do really like this card. I think though that you can live without it. There are other nice options out there, but obviously if you want the most power from Glaciela, you definitely want this card and Esper combination. Similar to Dark Odin, it is going to be double cost and very hard to pull. The one saving grace there though is that it is part of the permanent summoning pool. Just kind of stepping back away from this and talking about the game real quickly as a whole, and really this is directed at Gumi, if anyone out there is listening. These double cost vision cards at 36k to pity are a very hard sell in my view, and I really think that something needs to change with the price point of these vision cards by the time that Dark Tetra comes to global. These vision cards seemed tolerable when it seemed like it was sort of a once in a blue moon, maybe once a year type situation like we thought initially with Bahamut. This is now though the third double cost vision card that we've seen in the last 6 months. So my recommendation for you, Gumi, price them at a guaranteed 20 to 25k Visior. That's still considerably more than the 10k that we pay for every other vision card, and I think that would be a fair value for everyone involved. Otherwise, with these cards, while they're certainly very nice, it's just difficult to justify the cost of them, especially when they're getting released this often. Okay, next I want to quickly highlight Glaciela's new spear that's going to get released alongside her, and honestly, this is going to be a nice new option for all of the existing Pierce units out there. I'm highlighting the Assault version here. I think that's probably going to be the one that I would use in most cases with Glaciela. And this one has 3 passives tied onto it, which is very nice for a +5 item. First and foremost, it's bringing in that 30% reduced counterblock chance and 15 pierce attack. Very nice start there. On top of that, it's getting a 20 initial AP, and that's going to make it that much easier for Glaciela not only to get out her limit break, but also get out a couple of attacks on top of that afterwards, all without having to worry about using something like Ziza's bells, which I always appreciate. You know, there are a lot of other great TMR effects out there in the game which can help either your damage or survivability, so not being tied into using that AP regeneration is always a very nice option to have. So thumbs up for me, you know, on this equipment. Alright, so let's flash over to our 2022 timeline. Of course, Glaciela and her vision card literally just came out over on the JP side over the last couple of weeks. On the global side, in terms of wind and sort of prepping for her release, you know, we're going to be getting Sodali here very, very soon. I do have a preview on Sodali, you know, if you want to check that out, I will post a link to that above. Now, if you're a wind player or have any interest at all in Glaciela, I do consider Sodali's vision card a must-pull. Another thing to note is that Glaciela's release on global will be coming right around Halloween. So we're probably going to be looking at a Mastery 2 ability there for Halloween Little Leela as well. And again, I will say, you know, Gumi, if you are listening, please remember she's a 70 cost unit, so please just be very, very careful with that one. On the flip side, for the Earth elements, you know, unfortunately, Glaciela's release here is definitely muting the impending release of Queen Macherie just a bit. And I really have to pour one out for my Earth friends out there on that one. You know, we're getting a pretty nice Earth unit after waiting about a year, and boom, you know, brand new wind unit, and what may very well be the best unit that we've seen this year. Alright, so here is a mock build that I've put together, and this one is more all-around sort of damage focused. I do hedge that though with some resistances and bulk here that I will point out. Starting with the equipment, you know, the lance that we were just talking about, I really, really like this one. Another potential option though could be the wind spear from the Final Fantasy IV event. The armor that I have here is the survival vest, and hands down, you know, this is just my favorite cloth armor in the game. I use this in almost all of my cloth builds. If you have the means to make a couple of these, you know, I do highly recommend it. Other potential options there could be the plat robe or the smart coat. You know, once we get the +6 versions of those, they're pretty nice as well. For a TMR, you know, sort of leaning into Glaciela's natural crit based ability, I have Lara's backpack here for the 35 crit damage up, and that is simply one of the highest modifier ups that you can get out of a TMR in the game. If you don't have Lara's backpack, you could also look at something like Winter Loartha's TMR, or if you wanted to play a bit more defensively, you could look at Summer Killphase TMR for the shell effect. Those are all limited options though, so if you don't have access to them, you know, you could use something like Tidus's shoes. That's something that I always like for crit builds, or maybe even just go with her own TMR for that protect effect, and that would be pretty nice too. I think though, you know, at least in terms of auto PvP, she's going to be wanting to get both of the buffs up online that we talked about within her skills overview. So the TMR at that point may be more of a stat stick, you know, unless you're going for something specific. Now, I will just come right on to say, you know, this build is not free-to-play friendly whatsoever, but really, you know, that is nothing new when it comes to the wind element. You know, almost all of the best pieces when it comes to wind, you know, whether it's vision cards or units, are all limited time. So, you know, definitely something for consideration there. In terms of the Esper, I am using Dark Tetra here, as well as the corresponding vision card. If you're unable to pull those, you know, Odin is always a great choice. On Glaciela, I did pair that with the Nier Automata vision card, and this card is bringing a combination to the party of luck, spirit, and crit damage up. On the bestowed, it's also bringing a nice level of attack up, and those are all very nice effects for Glacia to take advantage of. In the party vision card slots, I have a gift like no other and Ahriman for a combination of attack, hit points, and dexterity. And lastly, I do have the forthcoming Sodali vision card, and like I said, I do consider this a must-pull for win teams. It has an absolutely incredible combination of both 15% agility and 20 area resist. The last card here is Downtime, and that one is pretty fungible, I would say, you know, but I do like the combination on this one of the slash resist, ice resist, and hit points on it. Now in this build, I've taken both accuracy passive support abilities that we talked about earlier, so I'm not heavily prioritizing accuracy here in my trust Trust Stone setup. If you are looking to counteract an evade meta, of course luck and accuracy sets for your Trust Stones would be warranted. In this case though, I'm bolstering some of her base strengths with HP and attack sets. Now starting with the left on the defensive side, I want to talk a little bit about my Trust Stone philosophy. And I tend to use this first slot here to counteract something that I'm worried about or a team comp that I'm targeting specifically in the meta. In this case, I'm looking at focusing a Bold Leela or Dark Fina team. So I've used a combination of attack resistance, debuff resistance to guard against Leela's slash and peril. And of course the dark resistance there to guard against all of their attacks. But this one could just as easily be swapped out and traded for another stone. Maybe I'm more worried about Final Fantasy XIII's lightning. So here I could trade this one out and put something that had lightning resist and missile resist instead. The other two stones that I have here are more or less static across many of my units. You know, these four I think have almost universal value, so I tend to keep them on almost all of my sets. Of course though, even those can vary slightly depending on which armor that you're using and which passives might be covered on that piece of equipment. Shifting over to the offensive side on the right, the first stone is kind of a utility-based one with the combination of acquired AP and dexterity effects. Now, dexterity is a stat that I think is pretty underappreciated in War of the Visions, but in Glacia's case, I think that you're going to want to stack as much dex as you can. It's helping her in three key areas, you know, her ability to crit, her accuracy, and lastly, it's also improving the damage of all of her main kit abilities as well. The other two stones here are pretty self-explanatory. I will say that instead of wind attack here, you could also consider maybe a crit damage up rune. I do think that's actually a pretty good option if you wanted to use this same set on another non-wind based unit. I do also have Pierce Res Penetration here, and this one I'd say is pretty much non-negotiable for Glacie. You know, other than Aranea's Spear, there's currently no other way to get Pierce Res Penetration in the game. And unlike some other Pierce-based units out there, Glaciela doesn't have a Pierce Res in Peril in her kit. So I think this one is pretty important so that you don't get completely shut down by highly Pierce-resistant units. So that's sort of the all-around build there, you know, and as you can see, the stats here are just a sight to behold. It's not often that we've seen damage dealers of this caliber sitting north of 10,000 hit points. You know, adding on to that, you know, almost 1900 attack here, which is just absolutely insane. I even played around with some builds where she was surpassing 2000 attack. Meanwhile, we haven't really focused too much on accuracy here in the build, but we are still sitting at 340% accuracy. Do remember too that Glaciela has access to that 30% accuracy buff, as well as the 30% hit modifier on one of her attacks. So that's going to get her to that 400% accuracy plateau, at least for that one attack, and that's actually a pretty good spot to be in terms of hitting even the heaviest of evade units. As I said earlier though, you could very easily swap this attack set over to an accuracy set if you wanted to get that accuracy even just a bit higher. So my final word and verdict here is, if it wasn't obvious from what we've looked at so far, this is just a hugely powerful unit and in my view represents a noticeable power creep moment for the game. She's a unit without much compromise whatsoever and an incredibly powerful unit in both PvP and PvE alike. She has that incredible stat pool and base accuracy that we talked about, as well as the ability to dispel both Immortal Spirit and Re-Raise. Her Limit Burst is a true highlight as well, bringing in a new chaining mechanic that will be just as valuable for chaining down a tank in PvP as it is in a PvE, Guild Raid, or Trial situation. This unit has me feeling shades of Garvel and the noticeable step forward that he brought to the game as we approach the first year anniversary, and that impending EX tier jump all over again. The third year anniversary though is still 5 to 6 months away on the Japanese side, so that considered, I wonder if this is just going to be a new bar for 100 cost units as we move forward towards that impending milestone, something that I will be monitoring closely here on the channel in the months to come. Now, all of that said, you know, this unit is definitely not invincible, and I don't think that this is going to be a Black Rose or Elena moment for the game. The EX unit and Elemental pool is much more mature than when those units were released, and perhaps more importantly, she is not a light or dark unit. So despite how amazing she is, you know, this unit can and will be countered, and honestly, I think that's healthy for the game and how it should be for the game to be at its best. How will she be countered though? As I alluded to, that lack of Pierce Res Penetration or Pierce in Peril, she can be shut down very easily by highly Pierce resistant units. Although those are rare, there are definitely some notable ones in the game. So I do think that makes that Nightblade subjob for access to an alternate damage type that much more attractive for Glaciela. If you happen to have Winter Luartha in your roster, I think that's a perfect pairing for Glaciela, as she does bring that heavy 38% Pierce Res and Peril with her, which could come in very, very handy. Now Snow, whom we just talked about in my last video, I think his value is going way, way up as well, and definitely represents another nice way to counter build against Glaciela. Alright, so wrapping things up here, and from my perspective, Glaciela is definitely one of my favorite characters in the story, so I'm pretty excited for this one, and definitely looking forward to some fun new possibilities with her limit break. Despite some of my criticisms, I do have to stop and give some props to Gumi, that 2.5 years in, they're still finding ways to innovate on the mechanics of the game, so I hope that we do continue to see more of that. Those new mechanics are a big part of helping the game to continue to feel fresh and exciting, even for veteran players. So that's my take on Glaciela. I want to know though, how are you feeling on this one? Are you seeing the power creep jump on this unit as I do? Are you a Wind main or a Glassy stan and already have your 42k reserved to pull her? Or are you an Ice player and relishing the opportunity to counter build against an extremely strong unit? Definitely let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video today, consider subscribing and giving a thumbs up. Help support and grow the channel, and help me push forward in hitting my personal goal of hitting 1,000 subscribers. And that's really all that I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.